All right, hello guys. So this video is going to go along with regulating the cell cycle notes. And just to kind of give you a heads up, in your notes packet, so you should have all started your cell division notes. This should be the third section. So it'll look something like what's on my screen called regulating the cell cycle. So far we have learned a lot about the cell cycle and about a lot of things that happen within the cell cycle. And so today we're going to kind of focus on what controls everything being perfect, what happens when mistakes are made and our bodies don't catch them. So again, please make sure you're following along with these notes and you're actually filling in the blanks. Okay. So here we go. So the average human body consists of 80 trillion cells. That's a lot of cells, and a lot of cells that had to have been created, remember, from pre-existing cells, right? So the cells in our body have gone through the cell cycle like literally trillions of times. Every 24 hours, 10 billion replacement cells are produced for just daily repair. So that's just like regular, healthy, normal repair. So billions of cells are made in our body every single day. Cell division must be closely controlled. We'll see today a little bit about when cells divide too quickly, it can be very bad. And then when cells divide too slowly, that can also be very bad. So just imagine if cells started going through the cell cycle just a little bit faster than they should. Imagine that we start with one original cell, it goes through the cell cycle, creates two cells. Both of those cells create more, which is 4, and so on, and so on, and so on, which is about the pace of, like the bacteria cells on your desk here in the classroom. Those bacteria cells, if they have all of their needs being met, man, they can just reproduce like crazy and pretty fast. So you can imagine, and you can see here how quickly cells can actually, if growing out of control, if nothing is stopping them, it can actually very quickly add up. Some cells in our body, we've kind of talked about this, but some cells in our body go through the cell cycle really quickly. And because of that, they can heal really quickly. So examples of this are our skin, a lot of the tissues that make up our digestive system, and our blood cells. So those are 3 examples of places in our body that are just almost constantly making new cells. Some examples of cells in our body that go through the cell cycle very slowly or not at all, and then heal slowly or honestly not at all, are our nerve cells. So you've heard of people having nerve damage if they break their back, break their neck. They've damaged a nerve cell, and that can sometimes, a lot of the times, be irreversible. So they can, if someone becomes paralyzed, they can try to go through some physical therapy, but for the most part, it's they're paralyzed for the rest of their life. And then also some muscle tissues. So we know that our muscles, like you guys can work out in the gym and get huge biceps, and those muscle cells are making new. Examples of places where our muscle cells aren't good at repairing themselves would be like our heart. So a lot of times if someone has heart disease or has heart damage, a lot of times that is permanent damage. So you can imagine if cells divide too slowly, it can cause disease or even just poor healing abilities. And sometimes that can honestly be genetic. So sometimes people just have problems or even specific conditions that slow down the cell cycle, some of the cells in their body. And it honestly just, they don't heal as quickly, or as fast as others. If cells divide too quickly, it can cause what we normally call cancerous growths, tumors. So lots of extra cells that have gone through cell division, that's a lot of times what we refer to as cancer. Cell growth can be turned on and turned off as needed. Cells in ideal conditions will grow only as needed. Cells placed in a petri dish will reproduce until the cells come in contact with each other. So this is pretty amazing. If we take a petri dish, grow some cells in there, they're going to grow. If you look at the picture on the right, here's a petri dish with cells that are pretty much surrounded in all directions. They've been triggered now to stop. So they literally can sense that they're surrounded by cells like our skin cells right now, and so, like our normal healthy skin cells. And so they've stopped reproducing. However, what scientists can do in a lab is they come through and they scrape a line down the middle of the cells in this petri dish, representing a paper cut, and we can watch the cells become triggered to go through the cell cycle, make new cells, make new cells, make new cells, until, again, now the petri dish is again totally covered with new cells, and then the cells are triggered to stop. So it's actually really unbelievable how pretty perfect cell division is in our bodies. The things that control this are called cyclins. Cyclins. So cyclins are a particular protein that regulates the timing of the cell cycle. There are lots of cyclins in our body, like lots and lots of cyclins in our body. Even if you just look at the whole cell cycle here, so you can imagine here we have interphase, so we have G1, S, and G2 with interphase, and then mitosis. There are lots of cyclins that play a part in all of, like if we break up the cell cycle, kind of double checking everything along the way. For example, cyclin A is one of them that's involved in the S phase. And there's a lot that happens in the S phase because remember, that's when our DNA gets totally replicated. So if you imagine all of our 46 chromosomes being replicated, there's a lot of space for mistakes, right? So these cyclins are responsible for double checking everything along the way and trying to catch as many errors as possible. And when they catch an error, our bodies are really good. Our immune system kind of fights off and kills our cell. There's two types of cyclins. So there's internal cyclins. Internal cyclins only allows a cell to divide when all the necessary events have occurred. So an example of this would be that one cyclin makes sure mitosis doesn't occur until the chromosomes have replicated, and another type of cyclin doesn't allow anaphase to begin until all the chromosomes are attached to spindle fibers. So there's a lot of little cyclins in here, just continuously checking along the way to make sure that one specific event has taken place. So internal cyclins, again, remember they're internal, they're inside the cell. Imagine them be even plopped in the nucleus and making sure that everything is a-okay. And then we have external cyclins, and these direct cell division by causing it to speed up or slow down. So they pretty much monitor the rate, and think of them as being external. They kind of respond to external like stimulators. So they trigger cell division as needed for growth and repair. Contact with other cells slow down the growth and prevent overgrowth and overcrowding. So similar to what we saw in the Petri dish, cells that are totally surrounded and crowded by other cells slow down or stop the cell division because they can sense that they don't need to make new cells. Proteins on the surface of the cells slow down cell division when they feel or they can sense each other. When we look at cell death, so a cell's life cycle may end in two ways, either because of damage due to injury or disease, which is bad, or natural death. Let's take a look at some examples. So necrosis is what we call premature death of cells due to damage or disease. So this is bad. This is never a good sign. And I think of this because I remember, I think of necrosis. So necrosis is bad cell death. And again, I use the term here premature in the definition. So this is premature cell death. Examples of this are, any type of injury, hypothermia. The picture here is a Google image of gangrene. So gangrene, we know, is a bacterial infection that causes cells to die. So this person's foot is just extremely infected by this gangrene bacteria, and the cells literally cell by cell by cell are dying and becoming, then their tissues become blackened. Here's some other examples of necrosis in plants and animals. Here's necrosis of the gills. You can see that this fish has some clumps of cells on their gill tissues that have died off. This looks like frostbite to me. Even I like this example of the tomatoes. So a lot of plants, plants also suffer from necrosis. Plants get diseases. This to me looks like a disease that farmers fight off. And you can see that the tomato, the fruit itself is actually, the cells are dying off, and you can tell that that's not sellable, right? So this is also an example of a disease that farmers fight like crazy, because you can imagine, and this spreads really rapidly, they can lose, an entire crop of tomatoes, for example, just because of this disease that ruins the fruit. So then programmed or natural cell death is called apoptosis. So I think of apoptosis is A-OK. So no necrosis, but apoptosis is A-OK. So this is programmed cell death. Once this started, a cell goes through a series of controlled steps leading to its own self-destruction. So it's kind of like programmed death, right? Examples of this are a tadpole's tail, webbing between our fingers when we're in utero. And this can feel sad, but it's very much meant to be. So let's look at some examples. An example of this would be the little footprint of a mouse. So a mouse's foot is shaped like it is because the cells between the toes die through apoptosis throughout development. The same thing happens with us, actually. So we, similar to mice in utero, so when we're in our mom's belly and developing, we, at one point in time, our hands and feet are fully webbed. So there's tissues here connecting them. Most of us go through apoptosis still in utero, right? So, and this is actually like one interesting phase of development throughout even ultrasounds, right? So, I remember with my 3 kids going through ultrasounds and being able to literally tell the difference between their hands and their feet. So normally, by the time we're born, the cells, the tissue between our fingers and our toes have all died. Occasionally, that hasn't happened correctly. So people are born, probably someone watching this right now, people are born where they're essentially, they still have fingers or toes that are still webbed. Another example of apoptosis is a tadpole's tail. So again, we know there's this process of this metamorphosis process is very scheduled. Now it's very well understood. And so basically, as the frog goes through this progression, the tail, for example, the cells that make up the frog tail eventually die off. I'm going to try to pause this. All right, sorry about that. Share my screen. Okay. So yes, eventually the tadpole tail that doesn't need the tail. So one by one, those cells on the tail just slowly die off and essentially kind of get reabsorbed and broken down into the animal. Okay. Another example of apoptosis or scheduled cell death is the menstrual cycle. So we know that after a female becomes, becomes sexually mature, they go through this cycle once a month. And what is physically happening is the uterus here every month gets big and fluffy, like literally gets really thick and ready for a fertilized egg to come and plant. Now, what we know, no matter how many kids a woman has, even if they have 20 kids, most of those months throughout the entire, those many years that most women have periods, a fertilized egg does not become implanted in the uterine lining. And so the uterine, all of those cells just become shed. And that's what we call our period or our menstrual cycle. So if apoptosis does occur when it should, does not occur when it should, disease occurs. And if apoptosis occurs when it shouldn't, disease occurs. So basically, anytime that something goes wrong is when we have problems. So what is it called when our cells start growing out of control? Again, that's what we call cancer. So uncontrolled cell division is cancer. This is a disorder in which body cells lose the ability to control cell growth. These cancer cells do not respond to the normal cyclins, those proteins, and they just begin dividing uncontrollably. A tumor is a mass or like a clump of cells formed by cancer. And there's two types of tumors. So we have cancerous tumors that may allow cancer cells to spread through the body. So cancerous tumors are the ones that we are most scared of. They can be the most dangerous, obviously. And then benign or non-cancerous tumors that don't spread through the body. So typically benign tumors, think of them as being kind of like localized in one area. Usually a benign tumor can be removed by a surgery. So most often how cancer spreads is that we end up with this clump of cells that slowly begin to reproduce uncontrollably. And we have this, so imagine a clump of cells. Eventually it becomes big enough that it's going to actually access our, like our blood vessels, right? So the cancerous cells somehow make it into our bloodway, really our bloodstream, and then it's spread throughout the body. So there's been examples I've always heard of, like, someone may be diagnosed with cancer in their liver, but they actually believe that it started out as breast cancer. So the breast cancer cells were spread throughout the blood system and landed in other organs. All of these extra cells disrupt normal activities by absorbing nutrients. They disrupt nerve connections. They prevent normal organ functioning. So you can imagine, our organs actually aren't that big. And so if you imagine that a tumor begins to grow and grow and grow and grow, those tumor cells are just sucking the nutrients out of that organ that we obviously depend on every day. It sucks the nutrients. You can imagine that the organ just doesn't function properly. So what we often see, I think most of the time with, I shouldn't say most of the time, this is off the top of my head, but a lot of times cancer is diagnosed just because of illness. So if a lump isn't detectable, a lot of times people begin to feel ill. They start to have they start to feel something weird, feel not quite right. And that's kind of when we start testing and can ultimately lead to diagnosing cancer. You've heard of the stages of cancer. That basically relates to the size of the growth and the location and the severity, or like looking at the location of the tumor and how close it is to blood vessels, and then the cancerous cells gaining access to our bloodway. So what we have to realize is we're all out of control. When our cells go through the S phase, 6 billion genes are replicated, right? Every time our cells go through the S phase and they replicate our DNA, 6 billion genes are replicated. So mistakes are bound to happen, and they do. All of our bodies have cells that start growing out of control. This is common and occurs daily. Our immune system normally destroys that cell. So remember, it happens all the time, but almost all the time our bodies, our cells detect the error. When we think about cancer, I used to go see this until this year. I used to go see this amazing genetics speaker talk, and he's a college professor, and he used to come to the area, and I would go watch him talk for like 4 hours straight. He was amazing. And he would always stress that we need to realize that cancer is genetic, but not inherited. Meaning cancer is caused by a genetic change in our body, but very few cases of cancer are actually inherited from one generation to another. So cancer is absolutely caused by genetic mutations. Most of the genetic mutations that are going to cause cancer happened in your lifetime. And they happen because of choices that you or your family, your guardian or whatever chose, right? So they're choices. You guys know things that cause cancer, and a lot of us are probably, not really fazed by it at this point in our life. We feel young, we feel invincible. But what we see now, the data shows that the average tumor takes about 30 years to grow. So it truly is the decisions that you guys make at this point in your life, and frankly, I'm young enough, that, so many of the choices that we make now, exposing ourselves to genetic mutations, could, well, I say they do honestly determine our future. So when we look at the numbers, 5% of cancer is caused by a mutated gene that is passed from parent to child, but that's only 5%, right? 5% of cases of cancer are caused from, passed on from your parents. The other 95% is caused by a sporadic mutation that occurs during your lifetime. So let's look at the causes of cancer. Obviously, we all know smoking. We know that chewing tobacco, right? So we know tobacco causes cancer. We clump these things. Sorry, I forgot. We clump these things and call them carcinogens. So carcinogens are cancer-causing agents that trigger cellular, like genetic mutations. We know that smoking, chewing tobacco, radiation, whether it's from radiation from the sun, right? UV light. Every time you walk outside, if it's sunny out, you have genetic mutations that occur on any skin that is exposed. That could also be radiation. You guys know radiation from like X-rays. If you aren't covered, is a known carcinogen. Exposure to certain chemicals. An example of that is a lot of the chemicals that we use in producing and manufacturing things. I always use the example of when I was pregnant, bigger than a barn, you guys, with my twins. We were trying to put their nursery together, and we would read all these, like we'd actually hardly bought anything new. I'm trying to think of an example, but even like painting the nursery. I was reading all these mom books and all these pregnant mom articles and all this stuff, and everyone just kept saying how important it was early on in your pregnancy to paint the nursery. If you're going to buy a new crib and a new mattress and all this new bedding and all this stuff, buy it, open it, and let it air out. Put fans on it, open up your windows, because all the basically like the chemically smells, a new car smell, new carpet smell, all of that stuff are known carcinogens. They're chemicals that are put into these products to do a number of things. Carpet is famous for like being doused in chemicals that repel stuff, right? So you spill a cup of juice, you can kind of see new carpet's going to repel it really perfectly. Well, it's been doused in these chemicals. Those chemicals are known carcinogens. A lot of clothes are made with fireproof well, a lot of things, toys are made with fireproof chemicals. Those chemicals are carcinogens. One, like, I know some parents that are crazy, they will, I mean, not crazy in a bad way, but like they're determined to not let their kids get new plastic toys because of the carcinogens. So they try to use like wood toy, like all natural little wood toys or something like that. And then the last one we'll talk about are some viruses. So we do know that some viruses actually are known carcinogens, and they increase the chances of cancer. Like one of the leading examples of that is HPV, which is a sexually transmitted virus. So again, remember, you guys, the choices you make literally at this point in your life determine whether, these decisions honestly do affect your life. We know that cigarettes are just jam-packed with lots and lots of different carcinogens, not just one type of carcinogen. So 82% of the people that die of lung cancer are smokers. So that's a huge percentage, right? Directly correlated. 20% of the people that die of lung cancer smoke on the day they die. Obviously, tanning beds are terrible. Sunning out, even just in the natural sun, terrible, 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 terrible. Again, I already mentioned that some viruses can cause cancer, and one of the ones we, kind of like the current events in this world is HPV, so human papillomavirus. This is a sexually transmitted virus. The tricky thing with HPV is that most people they contract the virus, but they don't develop symptoms. They're symptomatic, right? They're asymptomatic, kind of actually similar to how we've heard so many asymptomatic COVID carriers. So the problem is HPV is actually spreading widely through young sexually active humans because they're sexually active. They don't have symptoms. They have no idea that they have contracted HPV, and then they pass it on to all of these sexual partners. What happens, the HPV virus turns healthy cells into abnormal cells. Some of these abnormal cells can appear as genital warts. So sometimes some people will identify a problem by having physical warts on their genitalia. And some cells turn into cancer cells. So I've actually heard of a number of women that go for their annual or every few years, like a pap smear, and they basically scrape a few cells from the cervix inside the vagina, and they'll come back. I mean, this person has no idea, feels totally healthy, and some of those cells come back what we call abnormal, and those are precancerous cells. And a number of women I personally know in my life, adult women, were diagnosed with HPV. So because of those abnormal precancerous cells, they've never been symptomatic. So that's why we're so scared of HPV, because it spreads so widely and so really unknown. HPV is also thought of as a sexually transmitted cancer because of that. HPV, you guys are all about the age that maybe your parent, your guardian, your doctors are talking to you guys about a vaccine for HPV. So I don't know, last 5 or 10 years or something, it's become really common. So I bet someone in your life has talked to you guys about an HPV vaccine. And like the scientific community is trying to get individuals to get the HPV vaccine at the youngest age possible, just so that they'll be, that individuals will become safe once they choose to become sexually active. Each year, about 12,000 women get cervical cancer in the US, and almost all of these cancers are HPV associated. That's from the CDC website. I think I might skip past these. These are just some examples of what HPV can look like. So we have some genital warts. And just another reminder that the choices that you and I both make at this stage in our life truly, they make the path for what our future entails. So finally, let's talk about aging really quick. As we get older, our cells, the cell cycle slows down. The potential for mistakes increase with every single cell cycle. So therefore, with increasing age, our cells become more mistake prone. Also, obviously, the older we get, the more exposed we have been to carcinogens. We know that cancer can be prevented. So even just by like the importance of early detection cannot be stressed enough. There's a lot of like regular testing and checkups that you guys can go to in your future, just to make sure and to try to really allow for early detection of any precancerous or cancerous cells. So remember, what we're looking at here in life with our cells is really a balance between mitosis and apoptosis. So a perfect balance between making new cells and then cells dying off. Okay, I think that is it for your notes.